Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. Welcome to our panel on a new era in international trade, creating opportunities in the manufacturing sector. This is the third event in a series focused on international trade being held by FT Live in partnership with Tanger Med. So thanks very much to them for their support. My name is Jonathan Wheatley. I'm the Emerging Markets Correspondent at the Financial Times, and I'm being joined today by a great panel. I hope we're going to have a very interesting discussion with you all joining in as well with your questions. The members of the panel are Jesko Hentschel, who is the Country Director for Maghreb and Malta at the World Bank. He has a 30-year career at the organization. He has specialized throughout that time in poverty reduction, inclusive employment growth, and human development. And he's worked in Africa, Europe and Central Asia, Middle East and North Africa, South Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean. So a wealth of global experience. Also with us is Jaafar Mrhardy, who's the board member and general director of Tanger Med. He has been with the platform since 2016 and was previously a consultant and managing partner at ACEP Strategy Consulting and at PwC in Paris. And he can tell us all about Morocco's central role in the development of supply chains that we're looking at today. Linn Teigland also joins us. She is area managing partner for Europe, the Middle East, India, and Africa at EY. She leads a geographic area with member firms of more than 115,000 people across 97 countries and representing combined revenues of $15 billion a year. She is responsible for international tax advice, auditing, advising legal clients and business transformations, and has nearly 3 decades of experience in professional services for international clients. Another wealth of experience. And the fourth member of our panel, very pleased to see him here after some slight technical difficulties this morning, is Pere, who is the chairman and chief executive officer of Relats Group. That's a parts manufacturer primarily for the automotive industry, primarily a tier 2 supplier, supplying tier 1 suppliers, which supply automakers themselves, increasingly also a tier 1 supplier too. It has production plants in Catalonia, in China, Mexico, Morocco, Vietnam, and Romania, as well as a distribution center in Japan. So another broad-based experience, and hopefully he's going to give us some insights on the transformations going on in global supply chains from the inside. So lots to talk about. We will have some time for questions and answers at the end of the session. You can submit your questions, and please do anytime you want. We'll collect them all and ask as many as we can later on. There's a Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen, so please use that. And if you want to share your thoughts and tweets on social media, obviously, please do. And we'd be very happy if you'd use the hashtag FT Digital Dialogues. So welcome, everybody. Thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you very much to the panel for being here. I'd like to start, Pere, with you, if I could. We've been one of the live issues that we're looking at very much in the FT and is occupying an awful lot of discussion at the moment around the world is what's happening with inflation, whether the pressures that we're seeing on prices are transitory or whether they're lasting. And central to that is questions about disruptions in supply chains as a result of the pandemic, and whether those are going to leave a lasting legacy. So could we kick off, Pere? Could you give us just an insider's view on the short-term impact of the pandemic and the kind of disruption that you've experienced?
Yeah. Okay. First of all, good morning, good evening to everybody. Thanks to FT and to Tanger Med to give us or to give me this opportunity to address all of you. Well, first of all, we have to say that the pandemic is not over yet. So this is causing still, a number of restrictions. We have obstacles to travel. We have quarantines in many countries. We have bans to visit some customers, and there are still plants shut down due to the pandemic. Talking about the post-pandemic effects, First of all, there are important logistic issues, freight, especially container movement from Asia to Europe and the States. Costs have increased tremendously, 5 to 7 times. Also, transport time has nearly doubled. In terms of raw material shortages, this is a big worry at the moment. I mean, prices in several products have, increased tremendously as we have not seen in the last, I would say, decade. That includes metals, includes chemicals of all types. We have a number of our suppliers which have declared force majeure, and this is not only impacting in the prices, but also in the supply. Not to talk about the very serious problem which we are facing, especially in our, let's say, major market. About 85% of our activity is devoted to automotive, and the microchips crisis is affecting us all. I mean, the effect that it's having in the, I would say, in the world car production at the moment, on average, it's about 20%. 20% production reduction, and this is an offer crisis. It's not a demand crisis because the demand is there, and the effect is about the average lead time for, from an order of a new car to this car it's been delivered. At the moment, it's about 5 to 6 months, and this is another big constraint regarding these capacity reductions. Okay, the demand is, as I said, much higher, but this is the problem that we are facing. With all of this, what we see, I mean, the overall result is uncertainty at the moment, and it looks like this is a situation it's not going to be resolved until first part of next year. So that's
Okay.
it, Mark.
That's very clear. Thanks very much, Julie. I mean that quite a grim outlook in a way, and very specific experience there in the auto industry. Is that something that you think is more broadly based, and in particular on supplies and raw materials and inputs and labor? I mean, is this an issue you're seeing more broadly?
Absolutely, Jonathan, and I think Pere said it really, really well when he said we see a tremendous pressure on the supply chains, especially in the manufacturing industry, from a number of points. I just highlight those. Raw materials, for example, across the board have become more difficult to obtain. That applies obviously to what we're reading in the paper, and Pere highlighted that for the automotive industry, but it's equally for the construction industry. Raw materials in total have become shortage in supply with extremely high prices and extremely long delivering periods. This has created a tremendous amount of pressure across the board. I'd also highlight as number two, the transportation challenges. Pere highlighted that. Do you know that a container cost from the China across to Europe has risen in price from originally $2,000 pre-pandemic to $20,000 post-pandemic? That's a tremendous amount of pressure on our supply chains. And then I would mention not only the logistical challenge, but the challenge that we have in terms of wages and labor shortages. And what I mean by that is we see that because of the pandemic, a lot of our lower and entry level manufacturing workers are actually not as keen to return to work, or not able to in the same capacity. There's difficulties for companies retaining their labor at that level. And in some parts of industry, we really see that there's an incredible gap emerging. I know, for example, in the UK alone, there's a gap of over 100,000 delivery drivers who are just not able to be found, putting a difficult amount of pressure both on the transportation timing, and I think Pere highlighted that a little bit, but also just in terms of getting that done. Now, Jonathan, these are difficulties that we see, raw materials, transportation, and labor and wage pressure coming towards us. We don't think these things are going to be resolved very quickly. To be very honest, this is not a concept of the next few months. It's something we think that we'll be looking at least for the next 24.
Next 24 months. Okay, so this is kind of a new normal, but we don't know how long that normal is going to be around. Jesko, let me come to you. The World Bank did some, right before the pandemic, you put out a report on value chains and how they are changing. Are the changes that you were seeing then the same changes that you're seeing now?
Great. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. Hi, Jonathan. My internet goes in and out, so hopefully this works. If not, I'll dial in through the mobile. So I think it's too early to tell as to what's happening, and I think we just heard from Pere and Julie the significant problems on the supply chain. But let me talk a little bit about this World Development Report, which we put out in 2020, where I think the three big messages were: one, significant increase in global value chains from the 1990s to at least 2008, then is slowing down, but 50% of overall trade is now really integrated in these supply chains and global value chains just before COVID hit. Very important second message, this for the developing world. So we see that the spillover, the positive impact of integration in global value chains actually carries more benefits than in trade in final products. So in terms of growth, employment creation, poverty reduction, these spillovers were really very, very important. And then the third part is that before the crisis, the biggest threat was protectionist policies within the richer world, so to speak, and especially in the US. So this has kind of changed, obviously, fundamentally with the pandemic. Although I think that many of the location decisions which determine the global value chain establishment and integration will still be valid after the crisis. So macro stability, openness to trade, openness to FDI, the investment climate, all that as policies within countries, apart from those location decisions which are kind of more on the factor base. So labor, skills, obviously geography, connectivity, and also having an institutional set. So what does this mean now for after the pandemic? And I think some of the tendencies and policy discussions we see in some countries versus reshoring. So, bringing value change completely domestically, as we just had in the paper, which some of the departments in the US prepared for the White House, and where there were a number of value chains, including pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, lithium, and other kind of resources for battery production, where there was a strong case made to reshore these. But this will have very, very high efficiency costs. I mean, global value chains showed how integrated production can really have benefits. Now, in terms of nearshoring, and this is important for the Maghreb countries, I think many of the factors I mentioned will still be there after the pandemic. Yes, there will be the proximity to Europe, especially, is very important for decisions of European companies and countries to bring some of the supplies closer. Nevertheless, I believe that these fundamentals of location and the fundamentals of domestic policies will still be very important for the global value chains for the future. And here, last point, the Maghreb countries in MENA have still quite a bit to do. So trade is, yes, integrated. You have trade agreements, but non-tariff barriers are important. Trade facilitation, yes, it works. It would be great to hear from our colleague from Tanger Med on this. But at the same time, you do have trading monopolies in quite a few countries in MENA, which I think would need to be tackled. The competition agenda is out there, and we know that competition is so important to have these positive spillovers materialize. And lastly, it's skills. It's really human capital of the labor force, which will be important in the future. Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay, let's go to Jaafar for some words on that. Jaafar, just give us, first of all, if you don't mind, just a brief view from your end on the kind of disruption that the others have been talking about. But then if you wouldn't mind addressing that issue of integration in Africa, that obviously you're at a pivotal point between Europe and Africa, and integration is key to what you're doing. But to what extent is that moving ahead, and what kind of challenges are you seeing in that?
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you everyone for attending. To speak very rapidly about the challenges you already said, of course, there is the logistics. We've read everywhere that, for example, 94% of Fortune 1000 first companies had disruption in their supply chain due to the pandemic. There is, during this COVID, a lot of raise of costs, that has been already said. But other challenges also are based on the risk in terms of continuity of activity for our clients and for industries all over the world. Mr. Pere spoke about the ships, the car ships, lack of car ships, which has a lot of impact in the whole automotive sector. Some calculations speak about around the loss of 9 million cars in 2022, if nothing is done in this subject. So there is a real risk of continuity of activity for operators that are having components for their final product coming from all over the world, and the supply chain is again and again more and more important in the manufacturing and industrialist day-to-day business. But there is also another last point that I would like to highlight, which is the product offer and the adaptation to the product to the market. We've seen, for example, in the car rental that companies, very famous old companies like Hertz, struggled after the drop in travel due to the pandemic last year. The company used car sales also witnessed a significant drop in its business, and it has a loss of more than 20 billion debt last year. This new volatility of the customer, which is already a markup for those last years, the volatility of the customers is very visible in some trending services. We can speak about many services that were at the top of the services of the last 2, 3, 5 last years, but promising businesses today are seen, for example, for the car sharing, as difficult to develop in the next years, because the risk of the pandemic and the risk of other issues can be very strong on these businesses. In addition to that, what I would like to say about what had been said my colleague in the integration of Morocco and Africa, and the fact that the companies needs more and more to be near the production sites are going to be more and more near the markets. It's something that we are witnessing here in Tanger Med from a while. We are 14 kilometers from where I speak today to Europe. During my courses 20 years ago in a business school in Europe, I remember one of the items was to speak about the client-centric organization, the rise of the client-centric organization. Maybe we can speak today, due to the e-commerce, the new trade era, of something about not only client-centric organization, but there is a big pressure from the customer, from the client's needs. It's kind of dictatorship in some sectors. For example, in textile, we have a lot of fast fashion today. Companies like big brands like Zara, Massimo, or others are willing to have a very near location for the production. And here in Tanger Med, the business platform, we do really benefit from this relocalization of the production sites near to Europe, near to the markets of Europe. And we've seen last year, for example, in textile, and we also witnessed this year, a good growth in terms of exports to Europe due to the fact that we are near and close to the markets. I think the biggest challenge is to get back to what was maybe was before an old constraint, which is manufacturers before was always going to produce close to their clients, close to the market, or inside the market itself. It has changed during the last decades, but we are getting back to this situation where the more close we are to the market, the more close we are to the final clients, the better the production site is. And we hope as a door, as a gateway to Europe, and also a gateway to Africa, to be able to benefit from this new trend, this new heavy trend, in fact.
Okay, thanks very much. I was going to come to Pere next, but we're having some internet problems. So, Julia, I'm going to come to you to pick up on something that Jaafar was saying there about suppliers being close to their customers. I know you've been looking at what's happening in terms of nearshoring and reassuring. The kind of stuff that we've heard about that of several years now as globalization reportedly starts to go into reverse. Is that happening? Is that going to carry on happening the way that we thought it was going to happen?
You know, that's a really interesting question, Jonathan. At the beginning of the pandemic, we run a survey of all major, we try to get all major companies across Europe. And that survey reflected that over 83%, especially in the manufacturing industry, were really considering reshoring and nearshoring many of their operations. That was at the beginning of the pandemic, over 18 months ago. We reran the survey just 4 months ago to take a look at what's changed, what's happened. And Jonathan, I have to say it's dropped dramatically. It's dropped from 83% to a mere 20% that are looking at reshoring domestic activities. So really, as highlighted just from the previous speaker, bringing it much more closer to home. And actually another 23% who believe that they don't need to completely go at home to make it domestic, but at least nearshore. And I think a lot of that, Jonathan, is directed towards building resilience into the supply chain across the board, strengthening it and making it more agile. Effectively, a lot of the manufacturing companies are out there taking a look at their interdependencies on one or two suppliers, taking a look at their different locations, and making the trade-off between agility and resilience with cost. And I think we're going to see more of that going forward. So some huge drops to what we expected, but lots of activity, which aligns very much with the World Bank study as well.
Okay, Pere, good to see you back with us. I wanted to ask you to pick up on that very point. I mean, you have manufacturing centers around the world, built presumably over the past 10, 15 years. I don't know if the decisions that you took when you built those plants would be the same that you would take today. I mean, has that kind of decision making changed, or has the use that you put those plants to changed?
That's a good question. Well, we are happy to be where we are. We are a specialized manufacturer, and our approach is global. So we are serving. Our plants are located in the 4 more relevant continents for us. So we are in North America with our Mexico plant. We have 2 plants in Europe. We are in Maghreb, and that covers Middle East, and a lot of what we are doing from Morocco goes to Europe. Yeah, and Asia. Well, we are in China since 2004, and we are in Vietnam since 2019. What we are doing, the role of our plants is changing, and it will change a lot more. When we went to China back in 2004, I mean, China was the factory of the world. Today, for us, China is the market. It's the first market of the world. To be in Vietnam at the moment, our Vietnamese plant manufactures some products which are traveling all the way from Vietnam to Europe and some to North America. But this is going to change, is changing. Our production from Vietnam will stay in Southeast Asia, and it will serve basically our Japanese OEMs. This is the new role, which same for our Mexico plan. Our Mexico plan is devoted to the production that today is made in Mexico, and it goes to the States basically. What we are changing, and it will change a lot more, we are not going to manufacture some products, let's say, in Morocco to go to Asia, or to make product in China that it's going to go to Europe. All of this, we are reducing and reducing. Also, due to the let's say all the sustainability plans which we are putting in place. I mean, it does not make sense to burn so much fuel to just transport raw materials on lower added value.
Okay, understood. Jesko, you mentioned just now some of the positive spillovers from what we're talking about in terms of aiding with poverty reduction and so on. I mean, the World Bank has been quite vocal, hasn't it, about the need for action on poverty alleviation during the pandemic, and the need for coordinated action among global policymakers. UNCTAD today, I think, I'm breaking an embargo. UNCTAD today is putting out a report on the unequal nature of the recovery from the pandemic, and saying really it's too early to be talking of a recovery, obviously, as some of us have mentioned as well. Is it too much to expect that trade, manufacturing and trade, can help level out the recovery? And we talk a lot about building back better. Is it too much to expect manufacturing and trade to play a central role in that?
Thanks for this question. So if we look historically, trade and integration were the driving forces of economic growth and poverty reduction over the last decades, or the last centuries, if you wanted. And just looking at, we just heard a couple of examples from East Asia, just looking at this East Asian miracle in terms of poverty reduction in China, which was the biggest the world had ever seen, that came from trade, from export orientation, and from integration, also regional integration. And so the hope that this motor will still be there after the pandemic is clearly there, and I think the world will need it. And that goes also to some of the discussions in the developed countries in terms of, and we discussed it earlier, reshoring, and so bringing, for security reasons or perceived security reasons, manufacturing within the global supply chains, kind of to the country itself. And I think this will be very difficult for the developing and emerging country world. And if I may, just three factors which I think are starting to emerge from the distributional and poverty impact of profit. So the first is an increase in inequality within countries, and especially emerging market economies and lower income countries. And that comes because disproportionately the employment and income effect falls on the poorest, the vulnerable, the women, the children. You have very few people in many countries linked to formal sector safety nets, the ones which have been used very much in OECD countries in order to buffer. Second, we do see an increase in terms of the longer run impact on social mobility and also inequality. If you look at what happens on the learning side, this is not short term only, this is long term. And so, as in OECD countries, most kids are able to still be connected to schooling, to have home-based schooling. In many developing countries, that is not the case. And the distribution of those who have access and those who don't have access and it's very closely linked to income and wealth. So you could very well see that in terms of learning poverty, there is a gap that is opening up in the future. And third, we do see, and this is what you just mentioned, Jonathan, between countries, we're seeing the vaccination rates every day in the New York Times or in other magazines. You have Africa with, I think, below 5% vaccination rates, while the US and many other countries are now above 60 or 70%. That will have an impact on the recovery itself. So inequality at a global scale could very well be increasing. And that, I think, is something that the global community needs to really look at when we think about public policies for the future. Globalization and also global value chains had a lot of critics before the pandemic, and dealing with these global effects in terms of inequality and poverty will be crucial in order to have trade and global value chain integration be the positive and constructive motor for improving livelihoods the world over after the pandemic as well.
Okay, thanks very much. Jaafar, coming to you next. When we spoke before, you were talking about the importance of technological development in supply chains, the arrival of blockchain and artificial intelligence and so on. Is that something we're dreaming of, or is that something that's having a practical impact on efficiency in supply chains?
Yes, thank you for this question. It's a very important question also for us here in Tanger Med. I'd like just to get back to Mr. Jesko on the rate of vaccination in Morocco. It's good to say that we are more than 55% of the population is already vaccinated. So it's also had been done due to an effort by the government, by all the authorities, in fact, to recover economically as soon as possible. It was a challenge, it has been done. And today it's something that let us able to make companies like the companies that we have today. Mr. Pere can speak about that. During the COVID in Morocco, in Tanger Med business platform, we managed to keep a minimum of people working on the plants, and thanks to the vaccination, we're gonna ensure the continuity, hopefully, of the activity during this period. To get back to the question about technology, of course, today it's the key word. It's companies from a while we're speaking about companies that needs to embrace technology. We do host in our business platform many companies, for example, in logistics, sector leader, and also new challengers from all around the world. It goes from DHL, Jesko, Nippon Express, Emirates, whatever. It's a dozen of companies in logistics. As I said, sector leaders. And we have the opportunity to discuss and feel the temperature of the markets thanks to our close ties with our clients. And for example, yesterday I met with the regional CEO of Meyer, a German logistics company. And he was all the time about challenges speaking all the time about challenges in digitalization, artificial intelligence, or other new words that are the trend in logistics today. I think today there are two major keys to reduce the overall freight and supply chain costs. It's the first one, maybe the inventory management system, which is something that is now the beginning of the business is starting to be constrained by this new concept. Also for big operators, we have the example of Amazon, which have been more than 175 fulfillment centers, 150 million square meters. So it's not possible to manage these businesses without these new concepts. And also very important, and as I said, speaking yesterday about this, is the diversification of the supply chain methods and channels and technologies. And today we have more and more companies that are investing on technology, on new systems, and we try here in Tanger Med to be part of all this trend, this heavy trend. For example, Tanger Med, the Port Authority, has integrated the blockchain ecosystem that has been developed jointly by IBM and the shipping giant Maersk. That has been launched in 2018, and today we have more than 40 contributors, including the ports of Rotterdam, the ports of Singapore, Houston, Bilbao, and other ports all around the world. And it's important to be part of these projects, because those projects are going to manage or to show the direction of all the sector in the next years.
Okay. Pere, if I could come to you again. You mentioned when we spoke, a couple of days ago, that there's the chance that in the next decade, the world will no longer be manufacturing internal combustion engines. So a tremendous transformation in your industry, in the industry that you supply, part of, obviously, of action on climate change globally. Do you mind, giving us, look into the future? How is your business going to change, not only directly in that huge change in the automotive industry, but as a result of climate change and what businesses are doing to respond to it?
Yeah. Well, as you said, Jonathan, what we see, what's going to happen, that's what it's in our strategic plan. First of all, that we see by 2025, 50% of the new car offer is going to be either electric powered vehicles or plug-in electric vehicles. And by 2030, most of the OEMs have already said that they will stop completely in internal combustion engine cars. Therefore, that means it's a complete, disruptive change in this industry. Number one, if we talk about the mechanical part, the new powertrain, it's going to be electric. No more, no more pistons, no more, exhaust systems, catalysts, pre-cat, etc. The change is radical. It's dramatic. An electric car has 30% less components than an internal combustion engine. And if we look at the mechanical part, perhaps it's 50% the reduction. Of course, this will be compensated with all the new autonomous driving, all the software, all the infrastructure needed, all the 5G. Okay, that is making a huge change in the offering as well. So the market in 10 years' time, it will reduce. Mobility, the number of total car mates will be less. Also, there'll be a lot more personalized. And what we see, it's a big tendency on the OEMs to relocalize. That means that all the supply chain, it's much closer. It's much closer to the manufacturing points. And the manufacturing points, we see huge investments going to first world. We see, for instance, Germany making huge investments, Daimler, VW, Tesla, all of them. France is doing the same. Italy is doing the same. They are not taking this and moving it elsewhere for all these reasons. So here we see a big change in this direction. What our strategy is to be very close to the engineering centers, and we want to keep being a global specialist and a fair choice to our clients. In terms of sustainability, I think it's very, very important that, as I said before, that we reduce, transportation that does not add significant added value. I think that's quite key. And in our perspective, for us, we think that the climate emergency it's the next big worry of the world after the pandemic. We see all these, natural disasters. We see the fires in California. We see the big flooding in Central Europe. We see incredible storms that has happened only a couple of weeks ago in our region. Flooding which we have not seen in 100 years. So we need to respond to all this, and we need to work on it right now. So for this, I think we have to be investing in sustainable and in renewable energies, and make all this movement. And this is where our group is working really hard in this direction.
Julie nodding enthusiastically through a lot of that. I mean, obviously, this is the issue of the moment, but in terms of action, are we seeing these concerns translating into movement in supply chains?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that was really highlighted in what's happening in the automotive industry, that things are moving. And if I reflect on the comments from the World Bank and what the report is showing, it shows that the inequality is growing as we drive that nearshore, and that change, the simplification of the supply chain. I think there are two major factors, and it was just highlighted just a second ago by Pere. When you think about it, the sustainability regulation is also driving. Pere talked about the move to the electric car, but it's not just the move to electric in the automotive industry. It has to do with the regulation, for example, the plastic tax that's coming for everyone on packaging and logistics. That will have us completely readdress the supply chain. And Jonathan, when you take that added to the additional transportation cost, as Pere said, with no value added, it's clear to me that those supply chains will move in the next 24 months to build in further resilience. And the second thing that Pere highlighted indirectly is really the power of digitalization, automation, and frankly, AI on supply chains. There is an incredible acceleration at this moment in trying to move end to end on digital supply chain visibility and actually leveraging that to optimize that supply chain. And so you're going to see more of that as the technologies become much more stable, much more resilient, and that's going to help companies actually look to rebalance again in that contest between the balance of agility and resilience, offsetting on the cost side, and taking a look at what does that mean for offshore, nearshore, reshoring, and how much of my supply chain can be automated in itself.
Okay, we're getting quite a few questions through from the audience. Thank you very much, everybody. Do keep them coming. We'll get to a few of them in a moment. Jesko, I wanted to come back to you on something that you mentioned when we spoke the other day, which was about import substitution being pursued as a strategy in Morocco, I think, or in other parts of your region. Do you mind just talking to us about that a bit, and whether you see that as a positive development or a negative one?
Right. Thank you. Thanks for the question. Maybe if I may, just a quick rejoinder to Jaafar. So yes, Moroccan vaccination rates are really high, and if you look at what some countries in Northern Africa have done, it's very, very significant. Now, what I mentioned was kind of the average African vaccination rate, so and that clearly is driven in large part by sub-Saharan Africa, and that is still very low. And I do believe
you're right.
that there is a kind of a global public good here in having vaccination being rolled out all over the world, because you do want a recovery that comes from very different parts of regions in the world. That's one. And then just second, if I may, and Pere mentioned this, and Julie also commented, that is indeed that next big question, how to build sustainable supply chains. And Pere, you pointed out all of these climate dangers which we have. We can add probably hunger and food security to it, and we're just seeing what's happening in Madagascar. But here, Morocco is, I think, actually a very interesting case where the proximity to Europe and now the Green Deal and the carbon border tax are incentives for Morocco to have a green transition quite quickly. And I think this, Jaafar, you might want to comment on this, but this is very much in the public discussion here. So it's necessary for Morocco, its integration in global value chains, be it textile or aeronautics or automotives, to decarbonize industries right now in order to use the proximity to Europe in a positive way. So thanks to that. And then to your question, I think questions or kind of ideas about if supply chains are breaking down and we have a pandemic, and what do we need to do locally, and that countries go into questions about, well, we are importing and now we're going to go for a more stringent import substitution policy. I think we have that kind of around the world. I think it would be important to distinguish those debates that are on really regarding security, and I mentioned this paper the White House put out very recently, versus ones that are saying, well, we actually have an impact on employment in our country, and we don't believe in trade anymore, and because of that, we want to substitute imports. So kind of more the classical 70s or 80s import substitution. And that latter, I think we need to be very careful about. And I think we've learned, and many countries have learned the lessons, that import substitution policies, if not done in a competitive and outward-oriented way, like quite a few of the East Asian countries have done, it can really lead to long-term technology dependence, as well as much lower growth and welfare impacts in the countries itself. Thanks.
Jaafar, would you like to come back on those 2 points then that Jesko was just talking about on import substitution and the Green Deal and decarbonisation?
Yes, Jesko, it's really important for Morocco to stay integrated on the industry, on the European industry, to be part of the decarbonization or the low carbon strategy that is already announced and starting in Europe. Meaning that if we want to export goods from our business platform, for example, here in Tanger Med, we need to provide renewable energy to our clients. And this kind of decision has already been made by the Moroccan authorities. His Majesty the King launched years ago a big, very ambitious project in terms of renewable energy that is putting us, in fact, in the front line, in the one of the leaders in not only in Africa but also worldwide in solar energy, in hydroelectrical energy due to dams and other wind energy in some areas in the north of Morocco and also in the south of Morocco. So we are investing on this here in Morocco. We are also investing in this as a group in Tanger Med, and I am not able to give the latest news about that, but very soon we're gonna announce a very important move on the decarbonization of our production here in our export processing zone, so that we can make them and keep them part of the production of the European market and part also of the new business that is necessarily going to go low carbon, to take in account what is happening all around us in terms of climate change and in terms also of risk for our common good, which is the earth. So it's important for us to be part of this.
Thanks very much. Time has flown by. We've got less than 10 minutes of our slot remaining. So I do want to come to some of the questions from the audience, and do keep them coming. We've room for a few more. I'm going to ask 2 or 3 questions together. One of our audience members was asking about what Jesko mentioned about reshoring of semiconductor manufacturing, and asking whether, as we often see in other commodities, that when there's a shortage, suppliers crank up production, and so is there a risk that we could have a glut of supply of semiconductors in the next few years, maybe 2023, 24? And related to that, is that constraint and other supply constraints being aggravated by businesses overstocking? Julie, maybe I can come to you on that.
Yeah, I do think actually that in the semiconductor space, I really don't believe we're going to see a glut. I think they're smart enough to gauge the increased demand and spread that. I also think they're shamelessly using it in a way to drive up the prices in some spots. So we won't comment on that, but we should be clear about it. I do think that you do see industries overstocking right now. And I think this is largely a lot of the global players that have the balance sheets to be able to do that. You see them taking on raw materials and trying to keep as long as possible to bridge the gap until the supply chains have recovered. Jonathan, I think that's going to have some dramatic effect for some of our players in the middle markets, the small SMEs that don't have the capacity to carry those stocks are actually being, I don't want to say squished, but they're definitely feeling the pressure in the middle. And I think they're going to continue to feel that pressure over the next 18 months until those supply chains actually come back to a new level of normality.
And does that, Pere, maybe you can come back on this, does that mean that as businesses adapt to those supply constraints, sorry, this is another audience question, does that mean the companies are trying to, will companies start to work at reduced capacity? Is that something we're likely to see?
Not at the moment. Not at the moment. What I think in the short term, as I said before, at the moment what we see is there is a constraint of capacity. The demand is much higher. So I think once if for some very short time, we need to work on reduced capacity because the amount, all of these constraints we are having, but the outlook on demand, it's much higher than before. Therefore, it's very short, a very short period where we see these constraints. I mean, I think after, let's say, by the second quarter of next year, for instance, in automotive, everything related to semiconductors and the microchips should normalize because people have understood, this was President Biden has an immense amount of resources to relocalize these sources in the States. Same thing it's happening in Europe. At the moment, brand new plants are built to make microchips. Yeah, we have seen this with the first phase of the pandemic, where masks all had to come from Asia, and there was a big disruption with this. Now there's plenty. Now it's excess of capacity in Europe. Excess of capacity. I think this is what we are going to see.
Okay, a question from Agnes Gito in the audience. I'll bring this one to you, Jesko, if that's okay. She's asking, has the pandemic provided an opportunity for manufacturers to focus on sustainability and honoring ESG standards? And who checks? Are ESG standards being monitored and implemented?
Yeah, thanks for this for the question. Yes, I do believe the pandemic has brought ESG standards very much to the front of managers in manufacturing industries, and in various respects. One, clearly on the health side. I mean, just thinking about what happened here in Morocco in terms of the standards and the policies that were demanded and implemented in Moroccan firms in terms of distancing, in terms of regulation. So it clearly, from a public policy perspective, much more focused on the health side. And now, Pere started talking about sustainability chains for the future. I think the future of global value chains will be sustainable and also with a lot of focus on social and labor standards being met. So I see that scrutiny only increasing both in the pandemic and afterwards. Well, who checks? So I think we have quite a movement towards self-declaration. We do have standards that are monitored by some organizations. The IFC, our partner here in the World Bank Group, is working on this quite a few with countries and also with companies. But we don't yet have kind of a regulatory or governance system that overall certifies. I do think that a lot of what we're seeing now in terms of global chain development coming through is certification of the value chains and the different sectors themselves. And I think this is probably tense. Julie, you might want to comment on this one. I'm sure that you've looked at this in depth as well. But I do believe the pandemic has moved us into a much stronger governance system for ESF standards.
Yeah.
Julie, do you want to give us a quick word on that, and then we'll try and squeeze in one more audience question afterwards?
Yeah, I think Jaafar hit it really well on the nail on the head there. He's absolutely right. People are looking at taking a look at the supply chain and giving assurance as to how that supply chain looks, if it's meeting the standards. The EU just put in a proposition for increased disclosure around ESG, as many know. The corporate financial reporting disclosure, which will cover sustainability, and they are demanding that is at least provided with limited assurance. In other words, a local auditor in the country of operation would be taking a look at that to make sure that the disclosures that the company is providing in terms of what they're saying around ESG standards and sustainability are actually met. So I do think you're going to see a lot coming in that direction.
Okay, Jaafar, can I bring you in on that as well?
Yes, rapidly, just to speak about what said Mr. Jesko, it's of course the time also to look very deeply on those kind of subjects that maybe before the pandemic was not identified as they had to be. And I would like to just highlight an ongoing initiative with the World Bank, thanks to the EFC, that is going to certificate, in fact, the industrial zones of Tanger Med as an eco park. So it's a standard ecological park with many criteria to fulfill, to be able to let's say, have better standards in terms of water utilization, of energy sourcing, of all social aspects surrounding the industrial zones. And those kind of things can be very productive for our clients, and also for the impact, the social impact we want to have as an organization for the youth and for the community here in Morocco. So thank you, Jesko, and the World Bank for this initiative, the country initiative.
And thank you very much for that. We are actually right out of time. I was hoping to get to some of the remaining questions, but time is up, and we are strict disciplinarians here at FT Live, so we're going to draw down the curtains. Thank you very much indeed, our four panelists. Some tremendous contributions there, really interesting stuff. Thank you, our audience, for participating, sending your questions. I'm sorry we didn't manage to get to more of them. Just like to remind viewers that the session is available on demand for the next 30 days on the FT Live website, and do please share it with your peers, friends and family if you found it useful. Once again, panelists, thank you so much. That's been absolutely fascinating. As always, I've learned a lot from taking part in this, so thank you very much. Thank you, FT Live, for inviting me to take part, and a very good day to all of you.